The Oscars are a fantastic opportunity to spark a discussion about the artistry of filmmaking. Each category forces us to zero in on an aspect of filmmaking and try to understand how it works within the whole and what constitutes quality filmmaking overall. For better or worse, the Oscars do matter in the filmmaking industry for reasons that I talk about in my last video, Why Are the Oscars Like That? For reasons I also talk about in that video, I think it's important not to take them too seriously. They aren't always the best indicator of artistic quality or merit. That said, I think this is a good excuse to talk about some of my favorite aspects of some of my favorite movies of last year. So I'll be looking at some of the categories this year, talking about which movies I think were snubbed, which movies I think the Academy will pick as a winner, and where my personal vote would go. This video is sponsored by Mubi. Watch great cinema from around the globe for 30 days for free when you go to mubi.com/ThomasFlight. First, let's dive into some of the technical and creative Oscars. Let's start with sound. I'm pretty happy with the makeup of these picks. If there are any snubs, I would maybe mention David Fincher's The Killer or Michael Mann's Ferrari. To make room for those, I'd maybe bump out Mission Impossible or Maestro. But even if those films were nominated, there's still a clear winner in this category for me, and that is The Zone of Interest. The work here from Tarn Willers and Johnny Byrne is just phenomenal. This is literally one of the most interesting and powerful uses of sound I've seen in a film ever. What we see play out on screen is one kind of film, and what plays out in the soundscape is something entirely different. The relationship between the background soundscape of this film and what we see on screen is the entire conceptual and thematic core of the film. For me, what makes something deserving of an award is not just the artistic quality of the thing itself, but how well that quality fits within the overall picture of the movie. I really hope it wins. The sound design on the other projects is good, but this, in my opinion, is the standout choice here, and I'll be very disappointed if it doesn't take home the very well-deserved Oscar for Best Sound. Next, let's talk about original score. Of these nominees, I really like the score for Oppenheimer, Poor Things, and Killers of the Flower Moon. I think what Robbie Robertson is doing with Scorsese and Killers of the Flower Moon is something really unique. There's long stretches where the score almost becomes sort of a background texture for the film that kind of falls away but still gives the scene this sort of driving energy in a way that doesn't overwhelm the film. It's very subtle and minimalistic in a way that I like. But he also uses competing motifs in several places in a way that echoes the film's larger themes. The Poor Things score from Jerskin Fendrix was also really fun and avant-garde. It's weird in a way that perfectly fits with the quality of the rest of the film. A lot of the score is made up of these sounds that sound like strings being plucked and tuned, which is this great little weird effect, but also fits perfectly with the story of this kind of Frankensteinian character evolving into being an adult human. I wouldn't be surprised or disappointed though if the win here goes to Oppenheimer. I think this is what the Academy will pick, both because it's a beautiful score and because it's just a lot of score. It's very much there, and the Academy likes things that are a lot of themselves. I think ultimately the movie might rely on the score a little bit too much in a few places. I would have liked it if there was a little bit more room for the soundscape of the film to breathe. But this right here is one of the most beautiful pieces of score I've heard in a while, and I think that's pretty hard to deny. Moving on to production design. Out of these choices, snubs I might mention would be potentially Beau is Afraid or Asteroid City, one of my personal favorites. If I was going to make room for those, I'd maybe have to move out Oppenheimer or Napoleon, but I don't have a very strong feeling about that here. I'm not sure what the Academy is going to pick in this category. I think it might be Barbie. The artifice of the studio look at the beginning and its plastic world and how it's built, it doesn't just look like a toy world for no reason. That actually fits within the thematic territory that the film is exploring. And then it knows how to perfectly move from that into something more naturalistic, and then ultimately at the end into something very abstract. And I think that whole movement between different styles of production design is pulled off seamlessly and plays a really big role in telling the story the movie is trying to tell. I think The Poor Things Set design, again, is particularly strong. It takes on almost this expressionistic, surrealistic quality where the way the world is designed really feels like it's an expression of the character's perspective. We're seeing the world the way Bella is seeing the world. There's a childishness and playfulness to it, and it really feels unlike anything I've ever seen, including from other Yorgos Lanthimos films. For cinematography, if there are any snubs in this category, I think it might be Past Lives. Past Lives, I thought, was one of the most beautiful movies that I saw last year. And I could easily see myself bumping out Maestro, which had beautiful moments, but which felt a little bit unsure of itself, or like it was trying too many things in order to fit Past Lives in there. It's a very minimalist, reserved style of cinematography that relies more on composition than impressive camera movement or flashy lighting. And that's something that the Academy is just a little bit slower to recognize. More isn't always necessarily better though, and I think the style of cinematography in Past Lives perfectly fits with the story that it's telling, so I would happily nominate it. Poor Things is really wild and has some shots in it that are unlike anything else that I've seen. And again, like a lot of other elements of the film, I think the cinematography really plays this role in a larger expressive surrealist look that the film has. But I don't know if inventiveness is quite enough there. I think it's really hard to say this isn't going to go to Oppenheimer. Hoytava and Hoytema's cinematography here is undeniably immense and beautiful. I think this is some of the best cinematography we've ever gotten out of a Nolan film, and the lighting and just image itself is beautiful whenever the movie slows down long enough for you to actually take it in. In the costume design category, out of the nominees, my three favorites are really Killers of the Flower Moon, Poor Things, and Barbie. For the Academy, I could really see them going with Barbie here, or maybe Killers of the Flower Moon. Not very confident about that though, because I usually have a hard time predicting where the costume design wins are gonna go. My personal vote in this category would definitely go to Poor Things. I think the costume design here is really inventive, and again, what I love seeing is the way the costume design expresses the evolution of the character throughout the film. I think inventing costumes this weird and completely new that still fit within the expressionistic framework of the story the film is telling is a really impressive feat, and is ultimately more impressive than just accurately recreating costuming that already exists in the IP in the case of Barbie, or history in the case of Killers of the Flower Moon, or something like Napoleon. For film editing, the category I'm maybe most historically opinionated about, I really have no problem with any of these nominees. The only one I might take issue with just a little bit is Oppenheimer. I think this is nominated because of the technical feat of just assembling so many different interweaving narratives here, and just the size of this project as a whole, and that's definitely impressive to me. But there are moments where some of the individual smaller choices don't quite make sense to me, or the pacing just feels a little too choppy and fast. And so, you know, it's not my personal preference, but I respect the work that was done here. It's definitely an impressive feat. My pick out of these nominees would definitely be Thelma Schoonmaker's editing in Killers of the Flower Moon.
Can you find the wolves in this picture? All right, let's go. Come on.
I think Thelma is probably the greatest of all time in terms of editing, or definitely very near the top. She constantly is making editing choices that feel new and fresh and unexpected to me, while still working perfectly within the context of the story and never feel jarring or out of place. I think most people's critique of this would probably be that the movie's slow or boring, and that it's the responsibility of the editor to speed that up. I don't have that feeling about this movie. I think it actually has a really great sense of pacing, and Thelma knows how to just move through the scenes in a way that makes you not feel the length of the film. I think her editing is actually a big reason why the movie doesn't feel too long. That said, I'm happy to see movies like The Holdovers and Anatomy of a Fall here, which are beautifully edited in a way that's kind of less visible, less in your face, and I appreciate the recognition of just really solid, good editing that isn't showy. Now let's move on to acting, and we'll start with Best Supporting Actor. The obvious snub here for me is Charles Melton from May December, but I'd have a hard time choosing which of these nominees I'd bump to replace with him. Sterling K. Brown, Mark Ruffalo, and Ryan Gosling are all playing great, more comedic performances here that I think are all high quality, but usually that's not what the Academy ends up recognizing. So I'm not really expecting any of them to take the win. I think Robert Downey Jr. pretty much has this one in the bag, and it's not undeserved. It's one of his best performances ever and one of the strongest performances in Oppenheimer. His character doesn't, I think, have a lot to work with dramatically in that movie. It's a very talky role. There's not a lot of character backstory, and yet I feel like I understand his character largely because of Robert Downey Jr.'s performance there. De Niro's good in The Killers of the Flower Moon, predictably De Niro and very excellent. So I wouldn't be upset if I saw him get the win, but I'm definitely expecting Robert Downey Jr. to get the win here, and I think that would even be my vote in this case. For actress in a supporting role, it gets a little more dicey. I see two big snubs here. I would have loved to see recognition for Julianne Moore from May December, or maybe even Penelope Cruz from Ferrari. I think to make room for them, I would bump out American Ferrera from Barbie and Emily Blunt from Oppenheimer. Both of those performances were fine, but didn't really particularly stick out to me within their respective films. Ultimately, though, even if Julianne Moore and Penelope Cruz were nominated, there's a very clear winner here for me, and I think for the Academy, and that's Divine Joy Randolph from The Holdovers. This is just an incredibly beautiful, subtle, embodied, and grounded performance, and in so many ways, it's the emotional heart of the movie. She does so much just with her sense of presence and with her eyes. I think she's going to get the win, and it will be very well deserved. For actor in a leading role, the snub I'm feeling here is potentially Leonardo DiCaprio in Killers of the Flower Moon. I thought it was some of his most interesting and subtle work that he's done in a long time, and I'd have no problem bumping out Bradley Cooper so that Leo could take his place. Bradley Cooper and Coleman Domingo here are both doing fine performances, but they both feel very Oscar baity to me. These are pretty well-worn paths into historic biopic performances, and there's nothing wrong with them, but it just feels like a safe, well-trodden path. And I find performances that feel kind of safe just a little less fun and engaging to watch. Jeffrey Wright in American Fiction plays this line between the drama and the comedy of the character beautifully. I love his comedic sensibility. He has an incredible sense of timing as an actor that is just a joy to watch. There's a moment where he's just sitting at a bar by himself, taking a drink and eating an olive, and there's just so much character just in how he performs those actions. I think Cillian Murphy is probably going to be the Academy's pick because it's this big, kind of impressive performance within a biopic that is probably going to do pretty well in the other parts of the Oscars. And it's a good performance. I don't really have a problem with the performance itself, although I think I wish it had a little bit more room to breathe in the movie. Ultimately, though, my vote here would go to Paul Giamatti, who is playing an unruly character so beautifully in The Holdovers.
I can tell by your faces that many of you are shocked at the outcome.
I think he toes this line between being gruff and almost a little caustic while still maintaining a little bit of relatability and empathy really well. He kind of transforms this character very subtly over the course of the movie, and I just think it's really great work crafting a character and understanding how that character ticks. With actress in a leading role, we get into the territory of one of the more controversial quote-unquote snubs of the year. A lot of people were upset that Margot Robbie didn't get nominated for her role as Barbie. I think she did a great job in that role, but I think a lot of that character was built by the construction of the film itself. The production design, the direction, the costume design, all of those things I think made her feel like Barbie more than any specific element of her performance did. It's a good performance, but I don't think I'd say it's better than any of the other nominees on this list. And people who are seeing this as a snub are missing the fact that Margot Robbie did get a nomination for Barbie as a producer. She came into the film as a producer first and only accepted the role after Greta Gerwig offered it to her. And so honestly, her bigger, more primary role in the project is getting nominated and recognized by the Academy. The snub I feel strongly about here is Teyana Taylor from the movie 1001. This is a movie that got kind of overlooked, but her performance in this film is, I think, incredible. Again, like Coleman Domingo and Bradley Cooper, Annette Bening's performance here and Carey Mulligan's aren't bad. There's nothing wrong with them. I think they're good quality work, but they exist more within this Oscar bait framework that is kind of trotting these tried and true paths, hitting familiar beats really well, but still familiar. And it just feels kind of safe. And I'm interested in stuff that feels like it's trying to push the boundaries a little bit in an interesting way. Sandra Hüller in Anatomy of a Fall is really good in this incredibly naturalistic and grounded role, and she plays the ambiguity of that character really well. But ultimately for me, it's going to be up between Lily Gladstone in Killers of the Flower Moon and Emma Stone in Poor Things. Emma Stone's performance is really technically impressive. She's doing a lot physically and really evolving this character over the course of the film. And it's a weird performance. It's a really big swing and kind of a bold role to take on. But I think ultimately I would end up voting for Lily Gladstone in Killers of the Flower Moon. And I think that's probably where the Academy is going to go as well. It's such a subtle performance, and she does so much, so powerfully, so minimalistically in this role. I've seen some people insinuating online that she's not doing very much in this movie, but I just think those people are not looking very closely at what she's doing in this role. I'd love to see the Academy award this kind of subtlety in acting as well, because I think it's something that I love, and bigger isn't always better. But if it goes to Gladstone or Stone, I'm not going to be upset. With Best Director, we get into another one of the controversial snubs. Again, people were upset that Greta Gerwig was left out. Here, I agree a little bit more. I was impressed by Greta Gerwig's direction for Barbie. That movie could have been an utter disaster so easily, but there's a lot about it that I found to be actually interesting, especially in terms of direction. That said, even if Greta had been nominated, I don't think she would have gotten the win, and she wouldn't have been my vote for Best Director out of these nominees. The direction in all of these films is strong, but my two picks would be either Martin Scorsese or Jonathan Glazer for The Zone of Interest. Martin Scorsese is one of the greatest living directors, and that doesn't mean he deserves the awards by fiat, but Killers of the Flower Moon has a lot of the features of what I think make his direction great. That said, it's a tough choice for me between Scorsese and Jonathan Glazer here. The Zone of Interest is one of the most singular, confrontational, provocative movies that I've seen in a long time, and he spent almost a decade working on this film. He did years of research, and he's really breaking the mold here for how a film is normally constructed, shot, assembled, and how a story is normally told. When you do that kind of thing, especially, you need strong direction, because the people fulfilling the individual roles in the film can't just slip into their normal feeling of, well, this is how you do sound for a film, this is how you do cinematography. It really takes someone who is overseeing this sort of artistic innovation that's bringing the film to life. For that reason, I would probably give Best Director to Jonathan Glazer, but I'd be happy to see it go to Scorsese as well. And ultimately, if it goes to any of these directors, I'm not going to feel like it's undeserved. I think the Academy most likely is going to choose Christopher Nolan here. Finally, we get into Best Picture. Here, the snubs I might mention would be this year's great animated films. Both Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse and Boy and the Heron were some of the best movies of the year, and I think could potentially deserve slots on this list. I would have no problem bumping Maestro, especially for either of those, which had some interesting moments of direction, but ultimately failed to really cohere together as a great film for me. Aside from Maestro, there's nothing on this list that I feel really doesn't deserve the spot. I enjoyed all of these movies, even if they might not be my pick for best films of the year, and it's really hard for me to choose a clear winner out of this. Again, best in this case kind of ends up just being favorite. There's no clearly artistically best film. It's just kind of which resonates most with you as an individual viewer. I wouldn't be surprised if it goes this year to Oppenheimer. Oppenheimer was a really popular film, is obviously technically very well made. A lot of people loved it, and it's gotten a lot of traction at other awards. But kind of like Best Director, for me, again, it's gonna sort of be a toss-up between Killers of the Flower Moon and The Zone of Interest. Those were two of my favorite movies last year, and they're doing kind of similar things thematically, and it's hard for me to choose which one I think deserves the win more. I don't know how this is going to go. Sometimes the Best Picture winner ends up surprising me, going either the direction I want it to go or something else surprising entirely. We'll just have to wait and see. Let me know in the comments below what you think, but I encourage you to use the Oscars as an opportunity to spark a discussion about the filmmaking you love, rather than an opportunity to just argue with people about one thing being better than another. It doesn't make any sense to actually get stressed and caught up in arguments over which movies are going to win an award. This is ultimately art and entertainment and should be something that brings us life and joy and fun, rather than something that brings us down and makes us frustrated and angry. So I think it's good to just keep that in mind as we engage in Oscar discussion. If you saw my last video, I talked about how the Oscars are ultimately a flawed way of kind of showcasing the best movies of the year, because they're very susceptible to the influence of marketing budgets. And I think it's good to balance out the Oscars with other sources for film curation and choosing what you're going to watch. One source like this that curates films and is a great place to discover new things to watch is my sponsor for this video, Mubi. Mubi is an online hand-curated cinema with movies from all around the world. If you're interested in expanding beyond the kind of tight little bubble of mostly American movies that the Oscars focuses on, Mubi is a great way to do that. They have an incredible selection of global cinema. One of my favorite movies from last year that didn't get recognized at the Oscars, Fallen Leaves, is available now exclusively on Mubi in many countries, and I definitely recommend you check it out. You can watch that movie and explore their library for free for 30 days when you sign up using my code by going to mubi.com/ThomasFlight. That's mubi.com/ThomasFlight. They're constantly expanding the library with new things to watch, so check it out today at mubi.com/ThomasFlight. Thanks again to Mubi for sponsoring this video.